So as a graduate student at Western Illinois University in Macomb, those of us who were in our cohort for grad school who were from Wisconsin did not have a ready place available to watch Packer games. So one of the assistant directors of Residence Life welcomed us into his home where every Sunday we were able to, well, Sunday or Sunday night or Monday, we could watch the Packer game together. Now, I will say that the gentleman who hosted us at his home was very generous to allow us to be there, but let's just say he was a very passionate Packer fan. To one point in which Brett Favre made one of his gunslinger moves and threw an interception, our host, in his own home, got so angry that he punched a hole in the wall. Now on Saturday evening, December 20th, the Packers were playing the Chicago Bears. The groans come. A game that by the time I went up to bed at 9 o'clock, they had a pretty firm grasp on that game. In fact, I remember looking at the ESPN game metrics, said that the Packers, with 3 minutes to go in the fourth quarter, were 99.5% likely to win. Well, we know where it went from there. I watched on my iPad in bed, fumble, muffed onside kick, miraculous touchdown throw in overtime, and the Packers lost. I did not punch a hole in a wall. Thank you. But that game wrapped up around 10:30. I couldn't sleep until 1. A game should not affect someone like that. Despair, disbelief, frustration. I don't know what you call it. I wasn't angry. Fair enough. I wouldn't call it anger. I don't know what I would call it. But what I knew was that in the grand scheme of things, it didn't matter. I don't want to experience sports in that way. I don't want to experience anything in that way. Now, in the aftermath of my brother's suicide when I was 19, in the midst of my separation from my first wife, I was not diagnosed, but looking back on it, I had all the signs of depression in both of those times of my life. I have a friend who suffers from crippling anxiety. So much so that he and I have an understanding that at any time he can call me and I will help to work him through whatever it is that he has going on. We'll talk it out. And I know there are times where I find myself saying, this is not a crisis. But to him it is. So I help. According to the National Association of Mental Illness, 1 in 5 people experience mental illness each year. 20%. Mental illness happens. But beyond that, mental health struggles happen as well, and at a much greater frequency than that. And I have attended enough seminars, I have read enough books in my years of ministry and in my time as a hall director to know and see the trend that there continues to be a stigma around mental health and a stigma around seeking health or help when we have a mental health issue. I don't know about you, but when I enter into a conversation about somebody who's having a mental health struggle, it can get a little uncomfortable. We're not always sure, what am I supposed to say? How am I supposed to react? If somebody says that they were recently diagnosed with a mental illness and shares that, we can freeze. I don't know what to say. I'm not sure if I can help. And when it comes to mental health, we might automatically think of some major diagnosis. And what we'll find out, especially next week, is that mental health covers a broad range of areas, and it affects so many of us, directly or indirectly. Somebody feels a little off in life or are just concerned about how somebody might be doing in their mental health. There's a stigma about asking for help. I don't know, call it rugged individualism, call it stubbornness, but we don't always want to ask. Living out our Christian faith is most effectively done in community, usually in a church setting. And it is the support and sometimes the challenge of fellow Christians where we can best complete our walk with Jesus. No different than our own mental health. Times when we will need to talk to someone about our struggles, be it a pastor, be it a friend, be it a therapist, that it's okay to seek out and ask for help. And as we'll especially see in the third and fourth week of this series, what it looks like for us as a church community and all who are a part of this church community to be open to having conversations around mental health and fight that stigma when we ourselves or somebody that we care about is struggling with a mental health issue. Just being available to listen is so critical. Now, I'm sharing this series because a member of the church recommended that I do it. And I think this person is wise in suggesting it because I am concerned about how we as Christians and how we as a faith community react and work with people who are experiencing mental health struggles. Now, in our reading that we heard from the Gospel of John, I want you to hear those first two verses again. As he walked along, he saw a man blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Now, there was a belief within the culture of that time, and it pervades well beyond this time, sometimes even into today, that if somebody had some kind of a malady, that issue came because of an individual's sin or somebody in their family's sin, that it was a punishment for their sin. Now, this example is a physical issue, blindness. But there's a belief sometimes that if someone is experiencing depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, addiction, that somehow it has to be something they did, or that they are some way responsible for what's happening to them, and that is not the case. Sometimes it's the case, but most often it's not. Mental illnesses are health conditions involving changes in emotion, thinking, or behavior, or a combination of these. Mental illnesses can be associated with distress and or problems with functioning in social, work, or family activities. Look, we can't always control our circumstances, and how we end up reacting to the world around us, how we best cope with the world around us, can lead us towards mental health strategy or mental health issues through no fault of our own. By the third chapter of the book of Genesis, Adam and Eve, once living in perfect relationship with God, committed sin by disobeying God, and the perfect relationship between them was destroyed. And human beings have been struggling with sin ever since. And because we live in a world with sin, in a world where evil exists, we have to come to grips with the way that evil and that sin affects our lives. It's worth taking a little time to realize that we are not alone. It doesn't take long to look at the Bible and see the struggles with mental health that many of the folks who are in our Bible experienced. We heard and read together Psalm 42. David is in great distress. He knows that God is ultimately the source of his strength, but it doesn't stop him from writing, "My tears have been my food day and night. And while people say to me, 'Where is your God?' He writes, 'I say to my God, my rock, why have you forsaken me? Why must I walk around mournfully because of the enemy oppresses me? As with a deadly wound in my body, my adversaries taunt me.'" That is the word of somebody who is despondent. The man after God's own heart struggles with his own life and his interactions with other people. We heard Elijah, after his triumph over the prophets from Baal, flees for his life, leaves his servant, goes under a solitary broom tree, and says, "It is enough now, O Lord, take my life, for I am no better than my ancestors." God refreshes him with food, eventually meeting with God, and God reassures him of his calling. But even Elisha went through periods of depression and being overwhelmed. Job experiences great blessing, but when those blessings are taken away, his wealth, his prosperity, his family, eventually his own health. Book of Job tells us that he struggled to reconcile why all these things were happening with him. We can see in detail his emotions of grief and loss and seeking to find God in the midst of all that. Hannah, who had been without children, facing the torment of Elkanah's other wife, Peninnah, was weeping and unable to eat because of her grief. Jonah, in his anguish for completing his mission and being disappointed with how God acted, determines that he no longer wants to live. These are pretty extreme examples, but show us that the relationship between God and human beings and all the difficulties they faced, we are not alone. If these individuals took on responsibilities, faced life, and became overwhelmed, is it any wonder that we struggle the same way? So when Jesus was asked, what is the greatest commandment, he shares two: love God and love one another. And when it comes to loving God, Jesus quotes from Deuteronomy 6, and which says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength." But in the Gospel of Mark, Jesus puts it this way. He says, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and all your strength." So Rebecca Maxwell, in her book, Jesus and Mental Health, offers some perspectives about each of these areas. And I'll admit there's some overlap in these four different areas, but I would point out that what I'm about to share isn't scientific, but it's descriptive of our whole selves, and thinking about how we can best love God and love others as we look to our own mental health. So this word that translates soul comes from the Greek word psyche, and this word appears 105 times in, can we go to the next, thank you. It appears 105 times in the New Testament. And 40 times it appears in the New Testament, it translates as life. Maxwell, in her book, writes, "The soul is made of the Spirit of God and breathed into us as well as our human heart that can be turned over to God, lit on fire for his will and way by his extravagant love. The soul defines the essence of life for humans. The heart is concerned with feeling, emotion, affection, motivation. Yes, we have a physical heart that pumps blood and keeps us alive, but we can also think of our heart as the center of our emotional lives. We read in Psalm 13:5, "But I trusted in your steadfast love. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation." Or Romans 10:9, "Because if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved." Strength offers a strong physical component. Maxwell writes, there are many things that we do to build our strength. We eat nutritious food, move our bodies, push heavy objects to gain power, and we rest. And we apply both pressure and rest to keep our bodies physically healthy and strong. And to love the Lord with our minds, we can think of it on an intellectual level, about our brains and our ability to think. Paul writes in Romans 12:2, don't be conformed to this age, but be transformed by the renewing of the mind, so that you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. We want all of these areas that are connected to be healthy and strong, to do what we can to promote each of these areas for our own mental health. In our Methodist church tradition, we talk about the sanctifying grace of God, that once we make a commitment to Christ, we spend the rest of our lives seeking to live out our lives through Jesus. In the Methodist Church, we talk about the sanctifying grace of God as making that commitment to walking into the house and spending the rest of our lives exploring the house, growing in our love of God. And Maxwell talks about this in relationship to our mental health this way. She says, sanctification for the Christian involves the practice of putting off the way we used to think and behave and putting on attitudes, mindsets, and practices that more closely align with our new identity in Christ. It is no different with our mental health. So next week, we'll look at some of the more common mental health struggles that we are likely to see within our church family and our community. But if I've been able to do anything this morning as I wrap up, I'll say this. One, when it comes to our mental health and mental health challenges, it's everyone's struggle, whether we experience it ourselves or someone that we care about experiences it. Two, the Bible offers plenty of examples, and I only scratch the surface, that realize that mental health struggles happen to anyone and everyone at some point. And three, we must think about what we do so that we might best love our God with our heart, soul, mind, and strength. Amen. So for our hymn of response, I would ask for you to stand as you are comfortably able. We're going to join together in singing Loving Spirit. You can find it in our Faith We Sing hymnals, number 21, 23. The words will also be on the screen.